Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers. Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are so excited that you've decided to join us today.
We are. Last week, Christy talked about some dirtbag brothers, and this week, I want to talk about a pair of sisters.
Ooh. Sibling dirtbags is always so intriguing.
It is. Here on Buried Motives, we always love a friendly debate about nature versus nurture. It's one of the reasons we dig so deep into our research, to examine whether a dirtbag was just born a dirtbag, or if a particular environment created that dirtbag.
So do you think you have an answer for this case as to which it is?
No, you know me. It's always both. I can never make up my mind. I'm a permanent fence sitter.
That's right. That was still one of my most favorite moments in any of our episodes that we've recorded. If you've listened to a few, you'll remember that fence sitting conversation that we had.
Okay, though, with that in mind, I do want to tell you a case that I found in the Yukon that involved two sisters.
Oh, have we covered anything from the Yukon yet?
I don't think we have. I'm curious what you will think about their motives, and if you think their motives are a valid explanation for the terrible crimes that they committed.
Oh, you've got me intrigued. Let's go.
Are you ready to debate today?
I always am.
Charabelle Maureen and Lynzee Harriet Silverfox were born in the Yukon Territory of Canada 7 years apart.
Silverfox.
Silverfox.
That's a throwback to our very first episode. That was Bruce MacArthur's online dating name, or one of them.
Right. Silverfox.
Oh, man. We're already in trouble, I can tell.
Mm-hmm. These sisters' early years were spent in Pelly Crossing, a small rural community about 300 kilometers or 186 miles north of the Yukon's capital of Whitehorse. Pelly Crossing formed along the Yukon River and the Klondike Highway, and it was very close to an important historical trading post of Fort Selkirk. The area is part of a land belonging to the Selkirk First Nation, a self-governing Indigenous group of about 670 people. About 350 of those people live in Pelly Crossing. The population hasn't changed much. There isn't much movement in or out of the community. In one of the censuses that I read, there was only one immigrant family in the whole community.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just been generation after generation.
Yes.
Wow.
It actually isn't that surprising when you see how remote the community is. This Northern Tushani group is a matriarch society, and it's divided into two clans, the Wolf Clan and the Crow Clan.
So it's run by women.
Well, not necessarily run by women, but the lineage follows the mother's line instead of the father's line.
Okay.
The clan's organization is a very important concept to the community. Led by the elders of the group, the ideals that are taught are ones that promote traditions of living off the land and promote communal thinking, where there's an emphasis placed not on the individual, but on the community as a whole. So what's good for the community is best for everybody.
Okay.
But that is the ideal. And often the ideal is very different from what happens in reality.
Ooh, that is true.
Mm-hmm. Pelly Crossing, like many reserves in Canada, sadly suffered from a disproportionate amount of poverty, family violence, and crime, higher than other parts of the Yukon, with higher unemployment rates and lower education levels than other areas in Canada. There is a high rate of inadequate housing here, and often the residents will have poorer health outcomes because of their living conditions and lifestyles. There's overcrowding. Sometimes the houses have mold in them. Some houses are even so crowded that people have to sleep in shifts.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. And access to water is a frequent concern on reserves.
So deplorable conditions. And sadly, this is not the only reserve in Canada that is in this type of condition. It's a real tragedy that we have going on in our country right now.
It is. And unfortunately, it's a perpetual system because of the poor living standards. Often there's poor attendance in school, which leads to lower achievement levels. And then you have higher unemployment rates, which just keeps the cycle going. It's really sad. To add on top of all of that, the practice of residential schools played a large part in the creation of the environment that still exists in places like Pelly Crossing. Both of Charabelle and Lynzee's parents were survivors of residential school systems.
That is so sad.
It is. The story of residential school systems is a very sad part of Canada's history. Children were ripped from their homes in an effort by the Canadian government to assimilate the Indigenous cultures into a more European-style one. The results of these schools were devastating for almost everyone. Whole generations of children were removed from their culture and traditions with very little support. They were forbidden to speak their native languages, practice their traditions, or connect with their families and communities. Many children suffered physical, emotional, and sexual abuse in these schools, and sadly, many died. Those that did survive were then just as unceremoniously dumped back into their previous culture and traditions that they were now no longer familiar with. And they were just expected to get over what had happened to them. But many were unable to process the trauma that had been endured. And we've talked lots about unaddressed trauma, how it can lead to some pretty self-destructive coping mechanisms. And this was experienced by whole generations of Indigenous populations. Those generations then taught the next generation. The primary caregiver of any child is the most influential person when it comes to coping mechanisms and behaviors.
Especially a same-sex parent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that a lot of people realize just how devastating this was for the Indigenous people in our country.
It was huge.
Yes.
The emotional and psychological pain that's passed down from one generation to the next within families and communities carried through time, affecting how people think, they feel, or behave, even if they didn't directly experience that traumatic event themselves. And it's not just what's being taught and observed in the home that leads to Indigenous populations having higher than average rates of substance abuse, mental health disorders, and family violence. The study of epigenetics is actually showing that there are changes that occur in the brain when a person experiences repeated interactions with violence, neglect, and substance abuse. When any of these are combined, regardless of the combo, the effect is multiplied. Epigenetics is like a set of instructions that tells your body which genes to turn on and which to turn off. Genes that control our executive functioning and impulse control. Epigenetics is influenced not only by your DNA, but also by your environment and experiences. So when something traumatic happens, like the abuse and cultural suppression in Canadian residential schools, it can actually change how genes are expressed in the body.
That is actually fascinating.
This was one of the most fascinating courses that I took.
I can believe it. Which I guess goes to prove our debate about how nature and nurture is combined.
It actually is both.
Yes.
The changes in brain chemistry actually change some of the structures in the brain and then passed on to the next generation.
That is so wild to think about.
It is. And what I found really interesting when I was taking this course on neurobiology and adaptive coping mechanisms is that where I grew up, the Iroquois First Nation taught about a 7-generational forest that related to the generations in a family or a community. The roots or ancestors provided the framework for the forest, and the canopy, or the elders of the community, provided the protection for the younger trees that would then push up and grow and take their place. If one part of the forest, or that family, was affected, it would take 7 generations to correct it. Interestingly, scientists are now confirming that exact same thing through their study of epigenetics.
That is fascinating.
So it takes 7 generations to correct those changes that occur in the brain.
I think it is so neat to see how our bodies relate to similar cycles in nature.
I just find the whole thing fascinating. And it was really easy with researching this case to get sidetracked because that's where I love to study. The science of it all just excites me so much. Behavior and neurobiology are just so amazing.
She's not lying, you guys, because her face is beaming right now. I can see the excitement in her.
I think it just explains a little bit about these dirtbags' actions. Not an excuse, but an explanation.
For sure.
So when the residential schools remove generations of children from their families, the forest suffers. The home that Charabelle and Lynzee shared with their parents, their sisters, and their brother was not a happy one. There was alcohol, abuse, and neglect. After Lynzee was born, the environment in the home became more toxic, and social services were called to remove the children from their home until their parents could become suitable caregivers. Charabelle was around 8 at the time, and Lynzee was just a toddler. In the Yukon, First Nation children make up a significantly larger portion of the children in foster care than any other group. For the next 10 years, the children remained in foster care, each having different experiences. And it didn't sound like they were all kept together. Charabelle found an outlet in sports, and as a young teen in archery. She was pretty good at it. In 2006, she competed in both the Arctic Winter Games and the North American Indigenous Games, winning a silver medal for the midget bow hunter fingers in Denver, Colorado.
Wow, good for her.
Yeah, so she was actually traveling out of the country as an athlete. And I tried to look up what midget bow hunting fingers was. I think midget is the age category, but I could not find any definition for what bow hunting fingers is. I tried Googling it, but I just couldn't find out how it was different than other bow hunting. I was able to find a description, however, on the event that she set a record for in the Arctic Games. It's called Snow Snake, and apparently it was throwing a pipe or a bar down a track made of snow or ice. The person who slides the snake the farthest wins. And Charabelle set the record that year in 2006.
It sounds like similar track and field sports that we have.
Yeah, only with ice and snow.
Yeah, how Canadian.
In 2007, Charabelle competed in archery in the Canadian Games and placed 17th overall.
What?
The following year, she competed again in the North American Indigenous Games and brought home a bronze medal in bow hunting.
Was this all really amazing for her, or was it too good to be true? I'm feeling a little skeptical.
Well, all of this was amazing for her because it was an outlet for what she was having to deal with in the foster homes. And unfortunately, her time on the podium wouldn't last long. Charabelle quit school in grade 10, and not long after that, the medal stopped. Drug and alcohol became more important to her. Foster care for the Silverfox children didn't turn out to be much different than the residential schools their parents had attended.
Oh.
Charabelle and Lynzee both reported being sexually molested multiple times throughout their lives. As young children, they were molested. As teenagers, they were molested. And even as adults, they continued to be molested.
Oh.
When Lynzee was 11 and Charabelle was just reaching adulthood, their mother, Charlene, had made big efforts to turn her life around and was deemed fit to have her children back. She moved them all back to Pelly Crossing. At the time, a nearby mine had opened up, and it was promising a better life for those that worked there. It seemed to be like a good move. Years later, though, Charlene would say that she regretted this decision to move them back to Pelly Crossing. Whatever stability and healthy coping mechanisms the girls had developed deteriorated over the next several years. Back in that environment, by 16, Lynzee was using drugs and alcohol and had been sexually assaulted multiple times.
Oh, this is awful.
Mm-hmm. At the age of 19, her substance abuse increased dramatically, and her downward spiral caught real momentum when charges related to one of her sexual assaults were dropped and not prosecuted.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
This is awful.
It is. They don't have good childhoods.
Well, and because one of those sexual abuse charges is just dropped and forgotten about, would have such a negative effect on her psyche.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling like she does not matter and no one is going to help her.
Exactly. Charabelle seemed like she managed a little bit better for a little bit longer than Lynzee. She attended the University of Yukon and completed her EMS certification in 2010. She began volunteering in the remote community as a desperately needed first responder. Her later husband, Calvin, also worked as an EMS in the community. When they got married on March 2nd, 2015, they already had one child together, a little boy, and life seemed to be working out for them well. Charabelle, for a time, was able to curb her substance abuse that she had started at an earlier age. During this time, she stopped volunteering as an EMS and worked off and on, but enjoyed spending most of her time in what she described as more traditional pursuits, hunting and berry picking to support her family. For a time, she also became a little bit of an environmental activist, signing her name to several petitions to protect land use in the Yukon and speaking out in community meetings and environmental forums, expressing her concern for the environment on behalf of future generations.
So it sounds like she was still volunteering, just in a different way.
Yeah. And I can imagine having a baby at home would make it hard to be a volunteer EMS because you just have to drop everything and go when there's a call.
Yeah, and you can't do that with a newborn baby.
No.
Or even a toddler. But this is sounding so good for Charabelle right now. I'm very curious how this is going to go so wrong.
Well, it was really just a honeymoon phase in their lives because shortly later that same year, the couple welcomed their second child, a little girl. It was about 6 months after that birth that Charabelle started to fall back into old habits.
Oh, no.
Leaving her kids and husband at home, she began to join her sister, Lynzee, more and more, often to party and binge on drugs and alcohol. Old habits are hard to break when life is stressful. It was while partying that their dirtbag nature would be revealed. The girls had both had run-ins with the law in their past, and both had prior convictions. Charabelle had simple assault charges, and I'm not actually sure what a simple assault charge is.
It's one punch, one and done.
But that's what it was classified as, a simple assault charge. And she also had a break and enter charge. Lynzee had 3 minor assault charges.
Oh, hers were minor, not simple.
That's right.
Oh, I'm really curious, actually, what the difference is.
Even though they had these assault charges, no one really thought that the girls could be violent, and definitely not capable of murder.
But it's obvious by their assault charges that they do have violent tendencies.
Right. On December 12th, 2017, Charabelle, at age 26, and Lynzee, at age 19, were partying together. The party was well supplied with drugs and alcohol, and it was a lengthy one, requiring a trip to the neighboring town to buy more alcohol and visits to different friends' homes. It carried on over a couple of days.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I was thinking like an all-nighter.
No, more than an all-nighter.
Oh.
At one of the friends' homes, Charabelle got into a disagreement with the friend, and the 2 sisters decided that it was time to return to Charabelle's house with 2 other men, Derek Edwards and Vance Cardinal, to continue partying with some extra vodka. That was all in the early morning hours of December 13th.
Wait, was Charabelle bringing home a man to the home that she shared with her husband?
I'm not really sure how their living arrangements were going at this time, but I don't believe he had the children there in her home.
So they're split up by now.
Technically, they were still together, but I don't think that he was home with the children.
Okay. And Charabelle was so intoxicated with alcohol and drugs that she just decided this would be a good idea, regardless of her husband's situation.
Yes. Later that morning, Charabelle and Lynzee's sister Magdalene got a call to come to Charabelle's house. When she arrived with a friend, her sisters were in hysterics and covered in blood.
Oh, no.
The house was also covered in blood, although it was clear that someone had made a very poor attempt to mop it up.
Ooh, so just smeared it everywhere.
When Magdalene saw a lifeless body in the basement on a tarp, she knew she had to call the police. Her sisters begged her not to, and when they couldn't dissuade her, they fled down the road to another friend's house. As RCMP received the call from Magdalene just before 6 a.m., she didn't provide a lot of information, just that someone had died and that they should come to the house.
And good on her for calling. That couldn't have been easy to rat your sisters out.
No, I don't think it could have been. And I think that kind of explains why no one was at the house when the police arrived.
You can't really blame them.
No. Police entered the home, saw the blood all over the floor in the living room, and followed a trail down to the basement.
Ugh.
That's where they found Derek Edwards' body in a large pool of blood surrounded by knives and other weapons. Derek Edwards was 39. He lived in Pelly Crossing and was loosely related to the Silverfox sisters. They knew each other and they were friends. Not surprising in such a small community where there's only one school that has about 60 students, all the way from kindergarten to grade 12.
Yeah, everyone would know everyone.
Derek's family described him as a hard worker and a person that was always willing to lend a hand when somebody was in need. They said that he had the greatest laugh and sense of humor that kept them all entertained. But all of that ended that night. When police found him, he had multiple different kinds of injuries. He had blunt force trauma to his head and face, chopping wounds to his head, 13 stab wounds to his chest, a slash across his throat, and 12 penetrating injuries to his head caused by arrows.
No way! That is overkill!
Charabelle's crossbow laid close to his body. He had been brutally beaten. At the time, in Pelly Crossing, the RCMP detachment only had 3 officers. After finding the body, they were quickly calling in reinforcements from Whitehorse.
Oh, I bet.
But those reinforcements were hours away. The trio of officers had to figure out how best to track down these dirtbags. And the decision was made that one officer should stay at the house and guard the scene, while the 2 others went to look for Magdalene and her friend that had placed the call to 911.
Oh, because at this point, they wouldn't know that Lynzee was involved.
No, they don't know either of those sisters are involved. They were just given the random information that somebody's dead in the house.
Right.
While searching the town, they come across a resident that has blood on his hands, face, and clothing. Tyler Blanchard was known to police and was visibly drunk.
And was he the other guy that had gone back to the house with them?
Nope, this is a different guy. Because Tyler was drunk and it was a violation of his parole, they arrested him.
Okay.
So these officers know their community because there's only 3 of them.
Right. They know who all the troublemakers are.
Mm-hmm. So they know Tyler shouldn't be drinking. He's caught drunk. And plus he has blood all over him.
Yeah. Huge alarm bells going off.
Mm-hmm. Dion Edwards was also wandering the street of Pelly Crossing that morning, drunk.
Was he covered in blood?
He was.
What?
He was wearing a woman's coat that had blood all over it.
What is happening in this town that everyone is walking around drunk and with blood on them?
This is just what the RCMP are finding that morning.
I'm flabbergasted.
Mm-hmm.
2 additional men walking around intoxicated with somebody's blood on them.
Right. Dion tells the police that the jacket's not his, that it's Lynzee Silverfox's.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. The officers know that Lynzee is Magdalene's sister. They arrest Dion for public intoxication.
Was he on parole as well?
I'm not sure, but he was definitely drunk in public. And he's wearing this bloody coat. So they arrest him.
This is just a random weekday morning.
Yes. This is what they're finding.
Wow.
So these 2 officers make a side trip to the detachment because they've already filled the back of their cruiser to lock up their 2 suspects and seize any potential evidence that they have on them.
Sounds like they're doing a good job.
Yeah, it sounds like they're doing a good job.
For the resources that they have.
While those 2 officers are back at the detachment doing that, the lonely constable back at Charabelle's house has a conversation with another member of the community around 10:40 in the morning. Darren Johnny came to the house to tell the officer that both Lynzee and Charabelle were at a friend's house down the street, quote, passed out, and that Derek's sister, Marion, was outside of that house on the front yard, losing her mind, screaming and threatening the Silverfox sisters. Darren and Marion somehow knew that Derek was dead. Police haven't started to spread the word, and yet the word is already out. They already know what's happened.
Well, I'm sure the girls have his blood everywhere.
Mm-hmm. The constable at the scene rings up the other 2, and they tell him that they have also heard about this same disturbance. So they head over to investigate. And I cannot imagine how these 3 officers are trying to contain all this chaos that's happening in this small community.
I cannot even imagine. You have painted this picture very well. I can totally visualize what's happening.
All of the officers know that Lynzee and Charabelle also have court-ordered conditions around alcohol usage. Lynzee, because of her previous assaults, is not to have any consumption of alcohol, and Charabelle is not to consume any alcohol outside of her own home.
And here they are passed out at someone else's house.
Right. When they arrive at the friend's residence to investigate the disturbance, there was no one outside anymore. They had all taken off. RCMP officers knock on the door to, quote, find out what's going on, and Lynzee answered. It was clear that she was heavily intoxicated. Her speech was slurred, and she reeked of alcohol. She was immediately arrested for consuming alcohol and handcuffed.
And I'm assuming she was covered in blood. She had to have been.
She was. As they go to put her in the cruiser, the one officer takes note that she has no coat or shoes on. It's December in the Yukon, and to go outside would be cruel.
Oh, yes.
So he takes Lynzee inside to retrieve both of them.
But I thought the guy was wearing them.
That's right. The other guy is wearing her coat, but they're going back inside to get her something to put on, which I thought was kind of nice. As he walks into the house, you could see from the front door that Charabelle was lying asleep on the couch. Just before he wakes her up, the second officer checks the rest of the house to make sure no one else is there and to ensure the premises was safe because they've just received this call about this huge disturbance, and then they get there and nobody's there except for these 2 girls that have this connection to this other dead body.
Right.
The owner of the house was actually there too, but he wasn't originally seen. It just sounded like he popped out of nowhere, and this prompted the search of the rest of the house. So the second officer goes in, he's going towards Charabelle, who's passed out on the couch, and the owner's like, hey, what are you guys doing in my house? And the officer was like, oh, I better check and make sure nobody else is here.
Probably scared the crap out of him.
Probably did. That's how it sounded like in the report anyway.
Right. Well, and you would just be on high alert with all of this chaos going on.
Yeah. People are losing their minds and you have a dead body on your hands. Throughout all of this, Charabelle stayed passed out on the couch the whole time as they're searching.
Well, yeah, 3 days of alcohol will do that to you.
Once the house is secure, the officer wakes up Charabelle and she is not happy. She is agitated and belligerent and clearly intoxicated. She too reeks of alcohol and is arrested for breach of her court-ordered conditions. Both women are covered in blood. And when they get back to the detachment around 11:15, both are made aware that they are suspects in Derek's death. So originally they were arrested and taken in because they were intoxicated. But as soon as they get back to the detachment, the police let them know that they're suspects in Derek's death.
Probably a wise decision.
Mm-hmm. They are placed in a holding cell and are told that the police intend to collect their clothing and swab their hands as part of the investigation. By 12:50, the constables add one more to the small detachment's holding cells. Vance Cardinal is also brought in as a suspect.
Ooh, okay, Vance was the other guy who went back to the house with them.
Right. So now it's still just the 3 RCMP officers trying to get to the bottom of what has happened, because the cavalry from Whitehorse didn't show up with their additional constables until later that afternoon. So they have 5 people in their holding cells, all with some evidence on them. In an effort to preserve that evidence, the water is turned off to the cells because they don't want any of the suspects washing the blood off them or off their clothing. They also send one officer to his own home to get a few shirts to replace the shirts that they intend to collect from Charabelle and Lynzee.
Oh my goodness.
Because they have nothing in the detachment to put on them. They were mostly concerned about Charabelle and Lynzee's shirts and the blood on their hands because they figured that it could be the easiest to destroy. The sisters' shirts showed evidence of blood spatter that could help figure out what had happened, and the blood on their hands could be matched to the weapons at the scene. While the officer was gone to collect clothing, Lynzee, still heavily intoxicated, starts ripping off her own shirt and throws it to the ground.
Oh no.
The officer left at the detachment quickly collects it from the floor right away because he doesn't want it ruined any. As Lynzee ranted and raved over the next 15 minutes while a replacement shirt was being retrieved, she took off her bra and threw it to the floor.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, this time walking around topless for 2 to 3 minutes. All of this is being recorded on the cameras.
It's a rest and a show.
Mm-hmm.
She's obviously not in her right mind.
No, she's not at all. It's very clear that she's very, very heavily intoxicated. She eventually does put on her bra again and was given a shirt once the officer got back from his own house. Okay. But it still took her 15 minutes after she was given the shirt to put one on again.
Holy cow. What was going through those poor RCMP officers' minds? I can just imagine the panic he would have felt. I gotta hurry up and get home. And just quickly grabbing shirts and running back to his car to get back to the station.
It would have been complete chaos. I don't know how they handled it. And I don't think, no matter how much training we think that police officers have, they're not trained in this situation.
Nobody is trained for the scenario that you're describing.
Yeah. So while Lynzee's ripping off her clothes, Charabelle did change out of her shirt as well. And both girls' hands were swabbed at this time. Now both of the girls' shirts have been collected. But their pants that have blood on them too, they're not collected for quite a while later because there were no female officers at the detachment. They had to wait for one to come in.
And that officer is coming from Whitehorse because they don't have a female officer there.
Right.
Okay.
Female officers aren't very common in the RCMP in the Yukon. While the women are in the holding cells, numerous times they are asked if they want a lawyer. But in their inebriated state, they either refused or they just repeatedly told officers that they already had one. They were combative and disagreeable in the cells as alcohol and drugs wore off in their system. Charabelle was so drunk that she vomited over 40 times.
40?
Mm-hmm.
40.
40.
Oh, I've thrown up a lot of times in my life, but that is a lot.
It is.
She would have been just dry heaving by the end of that.
Yeah, I would imagine she would have had nothing left in her system.
Oh.
Charabelle did say that she had wanted to contact her lawyer, and that was arranged around 11:30 on December 14th when she was well enough to call herself. So there was at one point she told the RCMP officers, yes, I want to contact my lawyer, but they didn't call for her. They waited until she was able to call herself.
Okay.
And she was just so out of it that took until 11:30 the next morning.
Wow.
Both sisters appeared by telephone to a justice of the peace approximately 26 hours after their arrest on December 14th at 1 p.m., the usual time for bail hearings to be heard in Whitehorse the next weekday. Both women were transferred to Whitehorse Correctional Center to await a trial for first-degree murder charges. Over the next few months, police gathered statements and examined evidence from the scene to come up with a case against Charabelle and Lynzee. Through their investigation, they were able to release Dion and Tyler. They had only had run-ins with the girls after the murder, and so that's how they had gotten their coat and gotten blood on them.
Okay.
But all of the police investigation and prosecution's preparations would be thrown a wrench in February of 2018. A judge declared that the RCMP constables made a critical error in procedures while arresting and collecting evidence, and all of the charges had to be dropped against both sisters.
No way.
Yes.
Stop it. Those poor RCMP officers were doing the absolute best that they could with the resources that they had.
Yeah. It didn't matter, though.
Did they say specifically what it was that they did wrong?
Because they hadn't properly arrested them. And they had been detained over 24 hours without representation from counsel or judicial oversight. So because it had been that 26 hours before they met before a judge.
But why wouldn't they take into consideration that it took that long for the officers from Whitehorse to be there to help them?
It didn't matter that the detachment was remote, that it was understaffed or overwhelmed. It just wasn't an excuse.
That's bogus.
The collected evidence from the majority of the girls' clothing was also not admissible.
What?
It was pretty much that the investigation had to start over right from the very beginning.
If you tell me these girls don't do any jail time, I'm not going to be happy.
It was so bizarre.
Yeah, that doesn't seem right.
No.
They related to this judge?
No. It was gut-wrenching to read the reports that the RCMP constables made on how hard they tried to do everything right, and it was all thrown out.
That's terrible. And the poor family of Derek's.
Yeah. Lynzee was released on February 7th, and Charabelle was released the very next day. They just got to go on with their lives while Derek's family mourned. Of course, though, they didn't stay out of trouble. They continued to drink and do drugs and get into altercations with other people. On February 25th, Lynzee was partying at a friend's Skyline apartment on Louis Boulevard in Whitehorse. She hadn't even made it back to Pelly Crossing.
So learned absolutely nothing from what just happened. Wasn't even fazed that they killed a man.
No, not at all. Lynzee and her friend Chelsey Bien had been friends since they were little, and the two were partying with two other people that night. Throughout the day and into the night, Lynzee drank a 40-ounce bottle of rye whiskey, part of a 26-ounce bottle of vodka, and numerous cans of beer and vodka coolers. She also snorted cocaine and smoked crack.
That's a deadly combination. Her poor system. I don't know how she's not died of alcohol poisoning at this point.
Well, they had been doing it so long that their bodies had just built up a tolerance.
Right.
Around 12:30 that night, Lynzee decided to call it a night and grabbed a 6-pack for the road. According to Lynzee's story, Chelsey wasn't too happy about this, and the two extremely intoxicated women started to argue at the front door. As tempers increased and the fight escalated, Chelsey demanded of Lynzee, quote, "What are you going to do, stab me?" Coldly, Lynzee, who had already participated in murder, got up, grabbed a knife, and replied, quote, "Do you want to see something?" More yelling ensued, and then all of a sudden, there was silence. Before fleeing, Lynzee said, quote, "I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry." She took the knife with her, and to this day, it has never been found. She said she couldn't clearly remember what happened that night.
So she stabbed Chelsey.
Yes. Chelsey was found bleeding and unconscious on the floor of her apartment, right at the entrance, and was later pronounced dead from 2 stab wounds to her chest. The knife had penetrated her lung and her heart.
Because she got out for murdering the first person.
Mm-hmm.
Chelsey should never have died.
Yeah, Lynzee wasn't even out of jail a month.
Oh, what a dirtbag.
Lynzee was arrested and charged with murder a second time on March 8th, 2018.
I understand why we have to have these different protocols and things in place. But something like this, you think there should be special circumstances.
Yeah. The protocols are in place to protect people's rights, but they shouldn't be loopholes to get people off of murder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And now another person is sadly dead.
Yeah. It was a completely pointless death. And it unfortunately perpetuated the trauma in the community. 25-year-old Chelsey was a member of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation. She, like many other of Chelsey's friends, had similar upbringings to Charabelle and Lynzee's. And after Chelsey's death, many young women fell into deeper addictions and depressions from dealing with their friend's death.
Oh, yeah. They would feel like this is going to be my fate one day.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how they would feel hopeless.
Yeah. Lynzee pled guilty to manslaughter in May of 2021. There was a pretty lengthy delay in dealing with the case because of COVID. On August 27th of that same year, she was sentenced to serve only one more day in prison because she had already been there since her arrest 3 years earlier.
What? She only got 3 years for stabbing a woman to death.
Mm-hmm. Because she pleaded down to manslaughter.
Oh, that should never have happened.
Mm-hmm.
3 years for taking someone's life. I've said it before, Canada, we don't have to be that nice. That's not nice for Chelsey's family.
No, not at all. Lynzee was given an additional 3 years of probation with a weapons ban and ordered not to have any contact with Chelsey's family.
Big whoop.
Yeah.
That's nothing. She obviously does not respect any of her parole conditions.
No, or she wouldn't have been drinking in the first place.
Exactly.
Lynzee had made a sympathetic plea to the judge, expressing remorse and telling him all about her childhood, about the courses and programs that she had attended while being incarcerated, and how she vowed, quote, to never be the same person she was 4 years ago. And it had worked because he could have sentenced her up to 10 years for manslaughter.
Really?
Mm-hmm. People got up and left the courtroom when the judge announced his decision.
I would have started booing and been held in contempt.
She actually didn't get to leave prison, though, because while she had done time in prison, the prosecution was busy making a case collecting new evidence from statements that Charabelle and Lynzee had made to other inmates while they had been detained, along with statements made to friends and on Facebook after they were released. Lynzee had also had several conversations with corrections officers while serving time awaiting her trial for Chelsey's death.
Oh, we love a blabbermouth.
Yep. At times, both girls claimed responsibility. And at other times, both denied their involvement completely, placing the blame on their sister. Almost all of the statements that were made were braggy in nature, and very few showed remorse. To one friend, Lynzee had reportedly bragged, quote, "We didn't just stab him," or "We didn't just do that to him." On another occasion after Chelsey's murder, Lynzee bragged to one person that she had killed 2 people and didn't feel anything about it or towards her victims.
Oh, she's wretched.
Charabelle showed a little bit of remorse by reaching out to one of Derek's relatives through Facebook. She posted a message after her release from prison saying, quote, "Sorry about your uncle and all that. Didn't mean to do it."
No way! Literally admitting guilt.
Mm-hmm.
As the charges are dropped against her.
Yep.
Oh, this is backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So wrong.
On May 16th, though, 2019, the prosecution felt that they had enough of these statements to try a case against the girls. Both Charabelle and Lynzee were recharged with first-degree murder, forcible confinement, and indignity to human remains for Derek's death. Charabelle was taken into custody that same day. At that time, she was 6 months pregnant with her 3rd child. Lynzee was still in jail.
So this was right before she was going to get released.
Yeah.
This makes me so happy.
Both sisters appeared before a judge in the Whitehorse Territorial Court on May 17th, less than 24 hours later.
Oh, good.
Yeah, the RCMP and the prosecution were definitely making sure that all of their T's were crossed and all of their I's dotted. Both women were to be tried jointly. From the evidence at the crime scene and from the autopsy, it was difficult to determine which blow had actually been the fatal one. The forensic pathologist reported that several of the wounds could have resulted in death. The trial for both women was set to begin on March 28, 2022, and was anticipated to last 5 weeks. But just before jury selection was to begin, the sisters entered a plea. In exchange for providing the court with an agreed statement of facts that detailed just how and why Derek's murder took place, Charabelle pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and Lynzee pled guilty to interfering with a body.
No.
As part of the deal, the court stayed all of the other charges.
No way. This is ridiculous.
The plea bargain was jointly presented by the defense and the prosecution, and I actually think it was a good idea.
Well, I guess because it's pretty much hearsay evidence that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Was there no physical evidence on Derek's body?
So they did have some evidence that they could use against them. But what happened was that with all the sisters going back and forth about what had happened, there was no concrete evidence to support one sister's story over the other. So while they could put them both at the crime scene, they couldn't say which one had actually murdered him.
Right. And that's why they're being tried together. But they wouldn't have had their separate, distinct fingerprints on the murder weapons. I mean, and that's so up close and personal. There would have to be some kind of DNA transference as well.
You would think, but it didn't sound like the prosecution had a very strong case. And there was enough reasonable doubt to not be sure of what the jury would decide.
Right. So they're deciding it's better to have answers and agree to a lesser plea.
Right. And I honestly think it was a good idea because even the statement of facts that Charabelle and Lynzee provided as part of the plea deal differed so dramatically in their rendition of the events that night. And they were slightly different than the statements made by the only other witness that was present that night, Vance Cardinal. Vance had pled guilty to assaulting Derek in 2020. And as a part of his plea, he gave a statement of facts. The information that he provided was kept under a publication ban until Charabelle and Lynzee's plea deals were entered. The differences in their stories could have been because they were all so intoxicated that night.
Oh, I'm sure.
Or it could be because they all had shady pasts and none of them were being exactly truthful. Each of the statements given clearly comes across as trying to paint whoever the person giving the statement is in the best light possible.
Oh, 100%. I believe that.
Mm-hmm. In the early hours of December 13th, 2017, the four friends, Charabelle, Lynzee, Derek, and Vance, had all been partying together most of the evening and were all starting to wind down at Charabelle's residence. After that, all three statements diverge. Vance told the police that he had been sitting in the living room that night when Charabelle and Derek, who were sitting on the couch, got into an argument. The argument got heated, and Charabelle climbed on top of Derek and started to punch him. Just as Derek was winding up to strike back at Charabelle, Vance intervened and said that he punched Derek. The two exchanged more punches, and one of those punches caused Derek to fall to the floor in the living room. When Derek was on the ground, Charabelle continued to hit him, and at one point using an ashtray over his head.
Oh.
According to Vance, this was when Lynzee jumped in, and both sisters started to drag Derek, who was incapacitated, to the basement. This is when he decided that it had all gone too far, and he left the house.
I don't know about that, because there was so much blood up on the main floor.
Mm-hmm.
That wouldn't have happened if they drug him downstairs and then killed him.
Right. Lynzee's statement said she woke up to a loud noise and went to the basement where she found her sister shooting Derek with her compound bow. At that point, Lynzee said she knew Derek was already dead, so she helped her sister place his body on a tarp. She said that she delivered several punches to Derek's face before moving the body.
What?
Yep. And then she admitted to trying to mop up some of the blood. Lynzee said that she felt compelled to help her sister, and afterwards she had been pressured by Charabelle to confess to being the one that had delivered the fatal blows because Charabelle had children and didn't want to be separated from them. Lynzee said that she had even come forward in January of 2020 and told police that she was willing to testify against her sister because she was so upset her sister was trying to get her to take full responsibility.
Yeah, there's a lot of hogwash in that story, too.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just wake up from a nap and see a dead body and, oh, let me punch him a couple times, too.
Yeah, but that was her version.
And she was covered in blood.
Yep.
Yeah, no.
The last version of events was Charabelle's. Charabelle told the court that Vance and Lynzee started to have a couples quarrel and took it into the bedroom that night. That she and Derek remained in the living room. Charabelle laid down on the couch and later woke to find Derek trying to remove her pants. She started screaming that Derek was trying to rape her. And that's when Vance and Lynzee came out into the living room, and she and Vance started to beat up Derek. She said the altercation escalated, and she started to stab and slash at Derek with a nearby knife. When he fell to the ground, Lynzee delivered punches to his face and helped move him to the basement. And that's when Vance left the home. While in the basement, Lynzee continued to deliver blows to Derek's body, and Charabelle, in a rage, picked up her compound bow and started firing arrows into his head from point-blank range. 12 times. Charabelle admits that she delivered the fatal blows to Derek, but insists that she wasn't the only one to cause injuries.
Okay, this story to me checks. To me, it's the only one that fits the evidence.
It does seem that way.
And if you're going to admit to giving the fatal blows, why are you going to be lying about the rest?
Mm-hmm.
You're already taking the most responsibility, so she's got nothing to lose by telling the truth.
Right. And the other two do still have something to lose, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Both sisters agreed that when the adrenaline wore off, that's when they started to panic and they called their sister Magdalene. The sentencing took place less than 1 month after the guilty pleas were accepted by the judge on June 20th, 2022. Because of the plea, Charabelle's second-degree murder charge had a mandatory life sentence. Lynzee, now 24, received 30 months jail time.
Melissa!
And 3 years probation. With time served during the pretrial phase, she only spent an additional 24 days in jail.
Oh, I'm riled in this case. This is terrible. And she's already killed another person since Derek's death. And now she's going to be back out on the streets.
Yes.
Why did they not give her the maximum sentence? You know she's already murdered another person. Why is that not being taken into account?
Well, because she only pled guilty to interference with a body.
So was that the maximum sentence for that crime? Mm-hmm. That's just so frustrating.
It is, especially with her past history.
Yes, because history's going to repeat itself.
Mm-hmm. That's what we see with generational trauma. There's no break in the cycle. It repeats itself.
Right. And Lynzee's going to become a serial killer if she's not already.
She has to make some big changes to avoid that. The judge's determination during the sentence only had to do with the amount of time that Charabelle, now 31, had to spend in prison before she could start to apply for parole. At the sentencing, the judge made statements about the severity of the crime that the sisters had committed and the impact that it had on the small community of Pelly Crossing, because everybody in the community was related to either Derek or the sisters, or in a lot of cases to all three. The murder had created divisions and more trauma in the community than you could imagine. Victim impact statements describe the, quote, shock, fear, and anger with people picking sides, and the vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue that people were experiencing in the community. Many said that they were turning to drugs and alcohol to cope, with one person in the community saying that people were dying from the sisters' actions.
My goodness.
Some victim impact statements included the request to ban the sisters from the community because their actions were so far-reaching. In 2020, some community members actually burned down Charabelle's house.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
But not Lynzee's?
No.
Why is Lynzee getting off scot-free? I'm not enjoying that.
Well, Lynzee presents a more remorseful facade to the judge. She tearfully spoke at the hearing saying, quote, I sat in my cell every day thinking, how can I hurt people that I knew my whole life? And I'm truly sorry for my mistakes. I'm sorry to my community, and I'll do everything I can. I'll try to work on myself as best I can. I'm just sorry.
Yeah, right. She had bragged to people and said, I don't even feel bad about it.
Right. But in front of the judge, she's saying something completely different.
Yeah, and the judge can't see through that.
Well, many of Derek's family who were sitting in the gallery stormed out when she made these statements because they were not buying it.
No.
Charabelle didn't speak for herself, but her lawyer said that she was remorseful and that her client was, quote, working hard at reform with professionals at the Whitehorse Correctional Center.
I actually believe that because she came clean.
She did come clean, but I don't know how much change she's capable of. Wait till I tell you what else she does.
Oh, jeez. I keep trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Charabelle, stop.
I know. She seems like she could have just turned it around.
She had so much potential.
Mm-hmm. Charabelle said that her motivation to change was her 3 children. Her lawyer said that she had no wish to ever be violent again. The judge weighed Charabelle's traumatic childhood and the role that generational trauma could have played against Charabelle's past offenses and the circumstances and violence of Derek's death. Charabelle, during her short time out of jail in 2018, had racked up another assault charge. Not as severe as manslaughter like Lynzee, but still a very clear indication of her violent nature. The judge ruled that Charabelle would have to serve 10 years before being eligible for parole. With time already served, that means that she will be eligible for parole in 2029.
Ooh, that's soon.
It is. When she is released, she will face a 20-year firearms ban as well.
That's curious, because there wasn't a gun involved.
No. And Lynzee's was a weapons ban, but Charabelle's was written as a firearms ban.
Huh.
While the judge addressed the court, he made the comment that Charabelle must be held accountable for her actions by being separated from society. And this comment, I think, was a little bit cheeky by the judge, because I think it was in reference to her petition filed to the Yukon Supreme Court for being kept separate from the jail's general population. Charabelle claimed that it was unlawful to keep her on restrictive contact because it had negative consequences to her mental health. But officials at the jail said that the segregation was, quote, due to current and past assaultive behavior and noncompliance with officers' directions.
Oh, so she was being a brat.
Yeah, it didn't sound like she was the most compliant person. But I do get both sides of that argument.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first time, though, that Charabelle had lodged complaints while in prison, though. During the pandemic, she also made statements to the media about her mistreatment over not being allowed to see her infant son that she had delivered while incarcerated. Calvin had moved his family to Whitehorse to be closer to Charabelle, living out of a hotel for quite a while so the children could see their mom. But when the pandemic hit, the visitation was restricted and Charabelle was no longer able to see her kids.
Right. So that wasn't a targeted thing against her. That was globally, those types of things were happening.
Right. But she became quite the activist. She told news crews that, quote, it's hard for a mother to be away, to not be able to touch her baby, their loved ones, just for a second. When things started to open up, but visiting restrictions still remained in the prison, she said she felt like people had forgotten all about the prisoners and that it was frustrating that others got to go out and eat and get tattoos again, but she still wasn't able to regularly see her children.
I think she needs to have a conversation with Derek's mother and ask her how she feels about not ever being able to touch or hold or talk to her son.
Yeah.
It's a little hypocritical. I'm sorry.
Well, it's all about her.
Yes.
Right? She said she was doing everything she could to become a better person and change her violent ways by dealing with her trauma. But despite these claims that she's been putting a lot of work and effort into self-emotional regulation in order to avoid conflict and violence, she continues to follow that path. After being transferred to Abbotsford Correctional Facility in BC, she assaulted 4 of the guards, sending some of them to the hospital with injuries on January 18th, 2023.
Oh, so she's still a dirtbag.
Mm-hmm.
She's not reforming.
No, she was later charged and pled guilty to 3 counts of assault that year.
Okay, so this is almost guaranteeing that in 2029, she's not going to be let out for parole.
I doubt it.
I would be shocked. Mind you, this whole case has been shocking me, but I would be shocked if she's released in 5 short years after 3 assault charges in prison.
Mm-hmm.
On guards who are trained to deal with prisoners who are violent.
Mm-hmm.
She is out of control.
She is. And so it makes you wonder if she actually has the ability to change.
Yeah, I'm not thinking so.
Or is it just written in her DNA?
I don't know. Has there been any updates about Lynzee? Has she continued to be violent? Is she behaving herself? Because they both have similar DNA contributors to their makeups.
Right. I couldn't find any other reports of Lynzee having any other troubles. But she only was released in 2022.
Yeah, but that's 2 years. She only took a month last time to kill another person.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that means that she's behaving herself.
She hasn't made any headlines.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
let's hope.
And there are no court orders in her name.
Wow.
But that is the case of 2 sisters whose pasts were filled with trauma who continued to inflict trauma on other people. The dirtbags, Charabelle Marine, and Lynzee Harriet Silverfox.
Wow, Melissa. That case shocked me. And I still can't believe that they basically, well, Lynzee especially, just got a slap on the wrist.
Mm-hmm. She spent 4 years in prison for killing 2 people.
Right. And if Charabelle's story was correct, she could have pleaded self-defense. So there's definitely holes in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, they had been taught that even if they are sexually assaulted, it's probably not going to come to someone being prosecuted for that crime against them.
No, and I think that kind of led into why they reacted the way they did.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I really do believe Charabelle's story, in the most part. There could be lies to it, but I think that that's how it went down.
I think she had less motivation to lie.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be interesting to see what our listeners think about this case.
Yeah, let us know.
Do you think justice was served?
No?
I was asking our listeners,
I know,
Christy.
but I still had to put my little 2 cents in there.
Just like always. And that's why we'll be back next week when Christy will tell us another case.
Oh, and honestly, this one broke my heart. So be sure to tune in.
Until then,
See ya.
bye. Testing, testing.
Ooh, she
Ha-ha.
beat me to it. Good job.
Are you ready to debate?
To bait?
To debate.
Oh, I was like, what's baiting?
Are you? Fabulous. Get your dukes up, Christy.
Yes. Listeners have informed me that I am usually the hothead, so we'll see what happens.
You are what you are. There's no denying it.
That's true. Oh, am I going to get riled?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You'll be fine.
All right.
It's my thing corrected to shopping mechanisms.
That is a coping mechanism.
It is.
Shopping addiction.
Both had run-ins with the
With the po-po?
with the po-po. Because I'm not going to tell you anything about the murder. That's it. That's all you get to know.
At all?
No, I'll tell you later. But
I shouldn't be so disappointed.
that's all. That's all the detail you're giving
I'm
me.
like, what?
There was just a dead
no.
body.
Okay. Your face, you're like, what the heck did I write?
After 5, it's so true. I'm like,
you're like, after, then you're like, what were you thinking?
this is what I wrote. After finding the body shortly, they were called. They were quickly calling. Do you know where I'm at in my story, Christy?
I do know.
Okay, so the
But I know it's
RCMP
9 o'clock
officers.
at night and you're losing your steam.
So bad, right?
Well, this is a morning girl.
I am. Yeah.
Scratch all that whole conversation. Take it out.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.